You're like a circle that floats around me, keeping me safe and sound. And when I fall, you tied a rope to me. You're blessing me every day. I was down with an illusion, like a sparrow with broken wings. But now I shine with your reflection on me. I'm getting back up on my feet. That you showed up was written in my palm. You are a statement, explode like a bomb. I get to push myself to victory. You make me winner. You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day. You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day. Yes, I'm the winner, yeah. 'Cause I'm the winner, yes. Am I awake or am I dreaming? So far gone, I won't look back. And when I move, there ain't no stopping me. You're pushing me up to the top. I saw the clouds looking angry, but then the sky reached my mind.
All right, well, hello everyone, and welcome to Vidovy's first ever Social Education Aesthetic Summit. Vidovy is a company that provides educational resources to tradeswomen in the aesthetic beauty industry. We focus on utilizing technology and community to bring sustainability to an industry without affordable representation. By providing these free educational summits, we truly believe that we can improve the lives of female business owners in every niche of aesthetic beauty. With that being said, my name is Karen Flagg. I am an esthetician and the founder of Vidovy. I will be your moderator and represent the estheticians in today's panel. It is my pleasure to introduce our amazing and generous guest panelists, Rose Bullis.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Karen. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm Rose Bullis. I'm a founding attorney with Rose Bullis Law in San Diego. And I've been practicing law for about 20 years. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Rose. And our second amazing panelist, Julie Hansen.
So my name is Julie Hansen. Thanks, Karen, for inviting me here today. I teach accounting at several schools in San Diego State, Grossmont College, and Miramar. I also teach information systems, and I have an MBA in accounting. So, and I made sure and did my makeup just right for all the estheticians in the audience. I was really concerned about that today.
Good skin, yes. No, but thank you. I and our team, and I'm sure the audience is really happy to have you here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Honestly, every day, thousands of women and men, they graduate from aesthetic school each year. And many of them have dreams to open award-winning spas, studios, and successful practices where they can support not only themselves, but their families and their dreams. And for many of the estheticians that are in the audience today, as you all know, the real world is very different than what we were taught in school. And SES is designed to bridge the gap of real world education and affordability. While SES panels are designed to guide you, offer clarity, and point you in the right direction, the guest panelists cannot provide legal advice. But with that being said, please hold all of your questions for Q&A. We will have a Q&A segment for you. But feel free to utilize the reaction buttons. There's fun emoji reaction buttons that we would love to see you interact with us. And then use the chat feature. We have moderators and hosts to help answer any questions. And you can even use them to bookmark questions that you might have for later in case you forget. So, all right, let's go ahead and just jump right into the panel and let's learn about forming our businesses between LLCs versus sole proprietorships and independent contractors. So Rose, what are the differences between an LLC, sole proprietor, and independent contractor, and maybe who were these entities designed for?
That is a question I get every day, Karen. And the easiest way that I can explain it is, first of all, an independent contractor is not an employee. So if you work for someone and you're an employee, that means you're essentially working for that business entity. If you are hired by that business entity as a non-employee, you're an independent contractor. And you can be an independent contractor either as holding a business like an LLC, or be a sole proprietor and work for that business. So when we talk about independent contractors, we should just talk about them as them being non-employees. But to answer your question, there is the LLC and then the sole proprietorship. And another entity that we really won't spend time talking about, there's also the corporation. The easiest way to explain a sole proprietor is you're in business for yourself, you're doing your work, there's really no entity other than yourself. You yourself are the business. Anything you make from that business, you will be taxed at your individual tax rate. And really all that you need to do is worry about business license, licensing, and then maybe picking a fancy name and making sure that you're registering your name properly. And I'll get into the pros and cons of each of these entities later. But then the alternative is the LLC, limited liability company, which is a separate entity from yourself legally. So you register that entity with your state or the state you wish to register. And it's separate from yourself in that you could be a member, the managing member of that LLC. If it's just yourself, it's a single member LLC. And if you have others involved, it could be a multi-member LLC. But whatever the case is, it's separate and apart from yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, the good thing about it is, for tax purposes, it's as if it is yourself. Anything that's made through that business gets passed through to you and gets taxed at your tax rate, individual tax rate. So those are the primary differences between the two. Like I said, there's pros and cons, and we'll talk about those later.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. Julie, is there anything that you want to maybe add to that from maybe an accounting perspective?
I think actually Rose started to hit on some of the things I was going to talk about, which is great because it's really the tax consequences that you want to think about as you form the business. And of course you want to, and the other thing that I think Rose did a great job of is just reinforcing the fact that an LLC is separate from you. And what that means is that if anything were to happen during the course of your business, the only assets that are at risk are those that are under the LLC. And I just can't stress that enough. So if I was not an LLC, someone could come after my personal assets in addition to whatever business assets I have. And that's kind of that's a big deal. And that liability or that safety is a really important part, but it does get more complicated. You have to file different forms. You have S corps and C corps and different deductions, and yeah, so it gets complicated, but it's certainly something that you really want to think about.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, ladies. So we're actually, for the audience, you're going to notice that there is going to be a poll, and we're going to just ask you a couple questions. And it's just to kind of gauge an idea of how you're currently dealing and managing with your forms as well as your finances. So you should see that up on your screen. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let's see. Oh, looks like these are the... All right. I'm going to give you guys about a minute. Alrighty, about 20 seconds. Wow. This is great. Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and close the poll and reveal the answers. So let's see. All right, so as you can see, the majority of you people in the audience, you manage your own finances. It's funny, the entities are kind of, for the most part, even, which I wasn't quite expecting, but that was a pleasant surprise. And then as far as managing legal forms, again, most of you do your own, which is great. So awesome. All righty, we're gonna go ahead. Did the panelists, did you guys take a look? Are we? Okay, perfect. All righty, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna move on. So to the next question. So Julie, just to go even deeper, if somebody wanted to form as an independent contractor, as we saw in the poll, there was many of them, what are some helpful ways that these trades professionals can manage their money while solo?
And so this is kind of a fun question, and I'm going to share my screen because I teach accounting, and so I can't help but always have a PowerPoint. I don't know, that's just a thing that I have. So can you guys see my screen? Is that okay?
We can.
Excellent. So this is kind of, I want to start kind of like high level, and then we can dig into some of the details. So the next time Karen asks me a question, you're going to find a lot of little nuggets here. But here's kind of the cycle as I see it, right? So, and this is in terms of kind of managing yourself as a business. And the first thing I put is find your own lane. So like my lane is teaching, and I'm also hugely into real estate because those are things that I find to be comfortable. You guys are comfortable with, beauty and things like that. And so that's what, it's just like find your passion. All right. So that's the first step, because where your passion is, you will find your money. So then the next thing is, service your customers. And here's the good part. Then we start earning money, right? But then that's not enough. The next thing you have to do is figure out all of your expenditures. You're going to have what we call capital expenditures, which are the big time things. Maybe you need a chair, maybe you need a toolbox, maybe, whatever things you need, all the tools that you need to be able to service your customers. There are some big things that I'm going to get into a little bit of the analysis of that in just a second. So we have expenditure. So do you notice, like, the first thing we do is earn the money, but then right after that, we're thinking about, well, how do I control my expenses? Because if I can't control my expenses, then it doesn't matter how much money I earn. So that's a really big thing. And then keeping track of it all. And again, I'm going to go into some of that, but I noticed on here, it was such a great question, like, how are we keeping track of this? It's almost like Karen played into my hand here, because we really need to keep track of things, even though that may not be your lane. If the better you are at keeping track of your finances, the more successful your business will be. So that's kind of the high level, and then I'll get into a little bit more later. And I just want to know if the 38% of those that were voted for the LLC were because of what Rose and I just said. It's like, watch yourself and protect yourself. So it's good to hear that.
Great, thank you. So just to make sure that I'm like, to understand for the audience, so as far as like the tips for going solo, it really kind of just boils down to knowing your customer base and being able to pinpoint different monetization ways based off knowing your customer. Is that kind of what I'm?
Yeah, and knowing which one is going to earn you, which one you love to do, and hopefully that thing that you love to do is your biggest margin also. So I always look at the margin. What a margin is how much money did I earn and how much did it take me to earn that money? right? So the bigger the gap between those things, the better we're going to be. And the great thing about estheticians is that a lot of what you do is service oriented. So it's your time, which is hugely valuable, but you should be able to take the resources that you have and spread those out over a longer period of time. So it's a great field. Did that answer your question, Karen?
Yes, thank you.
Hmm.
So I want to shift over to Rose. So with the legalities of independent contractor, are there specific forms that should be managed when being that entity?
So we'll look at it from a sole proprietorship perspective, where you're in business for yourself and you haven't really registered a separate legal entity. Like I mentioned earlier, I think the only things you really need to think about from a legal perspective would be just this licensing that you need to do business and making sure that your business name is properly registered. Especially if there's a trade name that you're using for your business. But as far as I know, from a legal perspective, a sole proprietorship is just you proclaiming to the world that you yourself are the business. And when you're taxed, again, you just basically pay your tax rate. But as Julie said, when it's just you, you have the liability portion of doing business. So if you make a mistake and you get sued, you can certainly be, go bankrupt because all of your assets are at stake. Unlike at the LLC level, when you register a business as an LLC, in terms of paperwork, there's a lot more maintenance there. Did you want me to get into that, Karen, or is that?
Yes, that was actually my next question, is funny enough. So I know we talked a little bit about sole proprietor and independent contractor. They're somewhat interchangeable. With the LLC, what about those forms? I know that's a little bit more detailed.
Yeah, so generally, if you're doing business in a certain jurisdiction, a certain state, you're going to want to file your LLC with that state's Secretary of State or agency that monitors, right, legal formation. And so as an LLC, and let's just say that you're in business by yourself, you don't have any other people involved. So we're going to look at it from a single member LLC perspective. You're going to basically form your LLC by filing articles of organization, and you're going to basically proclaim that you are the managing member, sole member, and the liability rests with the entity. So now you've removed yourself from any being responsible for the debts of the organization. If the organization files for bankruptcy, you don't go down with the ship. And then in terms of paperwork, there's certain maintenance that you'll need to do. You'll probably have to file an annual report with the state and pay franchise tax. But in addition to that, the way you run your LLC will need to be documented properly in order to preserve that protection that you have, which means that you'd have to put together a document called an operating agreement, which, if you're a single member LLC, the operating agreement isn't entirely necessary unless it's required by the jurisdiction or the state where you filed. It does get a lot more complicated and convoluted, but aside from the operating agreement, generally if it's just you, it should be that should be it. But if you bring in a partner or you bring in somebody who is going to be a part of your LLC, then there's a lot more things to consider, because now you're going to be making decisions either as a manager or as a co-member or co-manager. And it gets a lot more complicated, Karen. So, but for purposes of this talk, I think we'll stick with single member LLCs.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that definitely answers that. I know LLCs can be a little bit more intensive, but in regards, Julie, to finance, so when someone is decided, okay, I'm going to be a single member LLC, how can they ensure that their finances are going to be managed correctly in that type of arena?
It's a great question, and something we should all be thinking about regardless of what kind of entity. And Rose, I wanted to ask, not to do crosstalk too much, but I believe there's one other thing that you didn't mention about the LLCs, which is what the annual fee is. And I believe it's like $700 or $800 in the state of California. Is that right?
Yes, so that's part of the maintenance franchise tax payment. Yes, so it's probably about $800 or so to maintain an LLC. It's expensive, I believe, if you're not revenue generating to a point where you can cover that. But you still have the protection. So it's certainly worth looking into as your business grows.
It's a
So
little,
maybe you start off as a sole proprietor and then you decide to form an LLC.
right. So it's a little like an insurance payment, right? Do I really want to cover that? Do I really want to cover myself? So it's a good policy. But that's sometimes what they mean when they say, oh, state XYZ is business friendly or not business friendly. And California just happens to be one of those that could potentially be called not business friendly because it's very expensive to do business in the state of California. So yeah.
Right.
Not to get too far off, Karen, but that was something I really wanted to point out because we all want to be protected. We all want to have that liability, but there is a cost to that.
Right. So then with that cost and managing that, are there tools or things or steps that the audience can do to make sure that the money management is there?
Yes, and I have so many tips. We could spend, I'd spend class time. I spend an entire 17 weeks talking about this. I'll put it down that's why I have PowerPoints to boil me down to a couple of minutes. So here's a couple that I wanted to make sure and share with you guys. The first most important thing, and I hope that this is not new news to you, but as you start to create your business and earn revenue, you absolutely need to separate your finances from your own. So you have a personal bank account, you have a business bank account. Even if you haven't incorporated or given yourself an LLC or whatever, you still need to make sure and keep those separate. I think I mentioned to you, I have real estate and I have several bank accounts, one for each property, just so that I can keep things really separate. Okay, so that's the most important thing right off the bat. The second thing is to set yourself a budget. What's a budget? How much am I going to earn? How much am I going to spend? And I put in here, not to be your mother, but credit cards are not part of the budget.
My mom would say the same thing.
All right. And then once you have a budget, then you start to track it. So one of my favorite tools, and I noticed many people said that when you're managing your finances, nobody put an app. And I wonder if maybe you didn't know that would be like Mint. Mint is free software that you can do. It can happen on your phone. It can happen on your on your computer, and it links up your bank accounts, even all of the different bank accounts you have, and it helps you really categorize that. And it's free. And let me tell you, free 99 is a great price. Okay. That's one of the things you learn in my class if you took my accounting class. Free 99 is a good price. So there you go. QuickBooks Online is another. Those two are probably my two favorites, but you need to start keeping track of your expenses and your revenue. You'll thank yourself later, and your tax accountant, or if you do your own taxes, you'll thank yourself later. All right. So, and this is one I kind of dreamed up myself, but I spend 17 weeks talking about this with my college students, which is that you have to spend an equal amount of time thinking about your costs as you do thinking about how you're going to make your money. So as an entrepreneur, it's really fun to think about how to go make money and where are my customers and what services am I going to offer, and all those things. Those are the fun things, but I want you to spend just as much time thinking about how you're going, where your expenses are going, where am I going to have to spend money to earn this money, and those should be equal amounts of time. All right, so that's another thing. So emergencies, this is kind of a oxymoron, planning on emergencies. So emergencies, like I just had to replace a roof in Texas on one of my properties because they wouldn't insure my house anymore because the roof was bad. Well, that was a huge, very expensive emergency. I couldn't have planned on that, but luckily I had money put away where I could take care of that. So when I say plan on emergencies, what I mean is just assume there's going to be an emergency and make sure and have money set aside.
How much do you think a small business, just to throw out a general ballpark number, because that's hard for some people to know.
Well, and especially like who planned on a pandemic? Like, I didn't plan on it. I could have lived my entire life without a pandemic, but all of a sudden we have a pandemic. Nobody put away for that. Nobody could have prepared for that. So I usually like to estimate I'd like to live for about 6 months, honestly, that's the cushion that I want to give myself
Right.
is 6 months.
Okay.
Anyway, so plan on emergency. I'm almost done because I know I'm probably out of time. Always be paying down your debt. I want you to be thinking about what's the value of your company, and the value of your company increases as your debt decreases. That's one of the elements. So always, always, always be looking to pay down your debt. And don't forget about insurance and taxes. And those are like the least sexy things you can be thinking about. But if you spend a little bit of time thinking about those in the beginning, you'll thank yourself in the end. And again, as I said, stay in your lane. Okay, so that's it. Those are some of and I think that applies whether you're going to be an LLC, an independent contractor, a sole proprietor. Certainly as an LLC, you'll have more tax implications. But that kind of goes beyond the scope of what we can really dive into right now.
Okay, well, thank you. Those were all amazing tips. And
Okay.
honestly, yeah, no, those were all great. And it's true. And, sometimes I know we've heard them a few times, but it's definitely something that when I've ran a spa in the past, you're just thinking of so many things, and the money is of course, as a lot of the ladies and gentlemen know in the audience, with service-based industries, I mean, there's never any hardcore consistency. It's always a wave. And so having that money definitely is something I'm sure, I mean, I know I would definitely use a reminder. So, all right, moving on to the next question. So Rose, do the legal forms or the legal management of a sole proprietorship differ from an LLC? And if so, in what way?
Well, yes. So we originally talked about a sole proprietor and a single member LLC, right? And we talked about how if it's just one individual, things are a lot easier, right? But say if you're an esthetician, say you want to open up a business, but you want to bring somebody in with, to the business with you.
It's common. It's very common.
Yeah. Because as a single member LLC, for example, if you have an operating agreement, there really isn't much to do because you're basically whatever money you're making, the LLC is going to be paying out to you. And of course, any losses that are taken by the LLC, it'll be flowing through to you. But now when you bring somebody else on into the business, now you have to think about somebody else, right? And are they going to be managing the LLC with you? And so that's why an operating agreement is so important, because in that document, now you start talking about, the membership units, which is the way you hold interest in your LLC. How are the membership units going to be given? Am I going to own 50% and she or he own 50%, or is it 60-40? So those are the types of things that are addressed in the operating agreement. In addition to, as a manager, meaning the person who takes an active role in the LLC, what are the duties of the manager, right? Versus the passive member. So those are the things that are set forth. And those are the issues that need to be maintained over time, because, if somebody's role decreases or increases in the business, it should be reflected in the operating agreement. So everyone's on the same page with how things should end up at the end of the year in terms of allocation or disbursements. And then, of course, if the business wants to expand and take on employees, there should be, because now you're thinking of employees under the business, not ownership of the business, but somebody working for the business. There should be provisions in there with respect to how that would happen. And it gets, more complicated from there on. But in addition to, like I said, the operating agreement and earlier, paying taxes and making sure your registration, your annual report is in with the state, I think the most important thing to remember with an LLC is, even though you are a separate person from the legal entity, things will be passed through to you But there are
Right.
different, believe it or not, there's different tax elections you can make as an LLC. And I'm going to get a little sophisticated for you here. And I don't know if this might be of interest to some of your listeners. And if I lose you, just call me and I'd be happy to give you a free consultation on this. But self-employment taxes, right?
Oh,
That could be a big number. And so some LLCs opt to become S Corps. For the purposes of this conversation, let's just say people form entities and then take tax designations for purposes of lowering their taxes. And so one thing to remember is just because you're an LLC or a sole prop or a corporation, for the eyes of the tax authorities, you can actually be something else. You could be treated as a partnership or a corporation or even a an S Corp, which is a small business corporation, and you could take advantage of the tax benefits that go along with being designated a certain tax entity versus the legal entity that you've created. So
right.
a little bit more than you asked, but I just had to throw that in there.
Well, and it's funny, and I know as far as aesthetics and esthetician goes, there's people that are just recently into the industry, and there's others that have full-blown spas with several employees and partners. So I'm sure there's a little bit here for everyone. So Julie, I don't know if you want to finish off with that. Is there any analyzation strategies that when they're forming these entities, or maybe they're growing their spas, that are used to monitor their business as it grows? Because a lot of these men and women, of course, their goal is to grow their practice.
And without boring you too much, hopefully, but these are really, I did some quick and dirties, by the way, and I'll share this slide with anybody that's in the audience, but I kind of did a breakdown of some of the highlights of the difference between mostly sole proprietors and LLCs. So what Rose was talking about was the tax thing over here, and who pays Social Security and medical, and who's an S Corp, and you get, your earnings passed on as a distribution. It gets pretty complicated. Okay, so depending on where you are in your business, you may or may not want to do that. But let's move on. And here are a couple of things that I would love for you to know, that they're very simple, they're very straightforward, but we can't, we have to keep our eye on the prize. And the eye on the prize is our net operating income. So a very quick lesson here in accounting: you take revenue, that's the money you're earning from doing your services. You have to take out your variable costs. So let's say, okay, and Karen, you're going to have to help me, but when I do a facial, I will have product that I use.
Correct.
Okay,
Tools, product, machinery, supplies, it all adds up.
And so if I give one facial, I'll use, X amount of lotion and soap and everything else, right? So that's what we call a variable cost. If I do one facial, I use 1 ounce. If I do 10 facials, 10 ounces. 0 facials, 0 ounces of product are made, right?
Correct.
We consider that to be a variable cost. We want to know how much those variable costs are on a per basis, on a per facial basis, or a per peel basis, or whatever you're doing, right? We know, because that's going to equal what we call a contribution margin. So that means that that is contributing towards your bottom line. After that, then some of the things you just talked about, the machinery, maybe a sponge is sort of a iffy part, but you've got some fixed expenses. Maybe you're paying rent for a place. Maybe you're paying, there's the insurance again. Whatever my monthly costs are, those are my fixed expenses. And after I take all of that away, I've got some net operating income. And there we're in the cash money right there. Okay, so a couple of things about that we want to make sure and remember, which is, one, cash flow revenue doesn't always equal cash. Okay, so that's, and I know we're not corporations, because if we were, we would have to do something called accrual accounting, which will take us another 17 weeks to go over. But what I'm trying to get at is, just because you did a service doesn't mean that you're going to have that cash money right away. So we'll want to make sure and plan out our cash flows, right? Don't go spending all of your money right up front, because you don't want to be, facial rich and cash poor. All right. So that's one of the things. So this contribution margin, really, this is what I talked about a little bit earlier, which is what's the margin for my services? How much am I making per service? And then that leads me to my next point, which is, what does it cost me to break even? This is one of the most critical things you can know. How many facials or services or peels or whatever you're doing, how many of those do I need to make to just break even this month? And what that means is, how many services do I need to make, less the
Right.
variable cost, to be able to cover my fixed costs, right? And my fixed costs are rent, insurance, taxes, advertising, if I've done that, whatever those are. That is an important figure, and it's a pretty easy one. You just take how much you make on a unit contribution margin, you divide that by your total fixed costs. You have a total number there. I can consult with you later on that one. The
All
eyes
right.
rolling. And then the last thing is, this is so important, you guys, when you go to invest in machinery or tables or chairs or whatever, some of the bigger ticket items, you'll really want to make sure that you know, how long is it going to take you to pay back that asset, right?
And it's funny, I've actually spoken with one of the estheticians. She's a popular consultant, and she was talking with me. And one of the things is, when we meet people who sell us the machines, it's like the last thing that you think about in that moment is, how many of these, well, they're not going to be free, but essentially they're going to be free services you're going to do with the machine. Is it going to take you 1,000 treatments to pay that off before you start finally profiting? And if it does take probably not 1,000, but 500 treatments, what about maintenance costs? Are you going to have to pay maintenance before you even break even with that machine?
Right.
But I'm gonna go ahead and skip to the last question before we get into Q&A. And if you could just give me just a quick 20-second or less answer. If our audience wanted to form as one of these entities right now after this summit, what would you recommend their first step be? Rose, I'm gonna let you go first.
Well, I would actually recommend that they go and do a little bit of research and read about each entity, right? Before deciding, and then ask their fellow estheticians or other business owners what's worked and what hasn't. Because if you just read the definition of what a sole proprietor is or an LLC, it's all out of context. You really
Right.
need to know what your industry is seeing, what it's facing. If there's low risk, stay a sole proprietor. If it's high risk, form an LLC, but budget for your annual taxes. But at this very moment, if you are in a hurry and you've already done that, you can go find a great lawyer to help you do that.
Right.
But lawyers are expensive. I hate to say this, but these robo lawyers online seem to do the quick and dirty at a low cost if it's just you. It gets complicated if you bring in other members. If you want to issue units, employees, if you want to do something fancy, then I suggest you talk to a real lawyer to help walk you through what it is you're doing and help you with your paperwork.
Great. Thank you. And now that's all really good advice, because of course we do love the conveniency of online, but it's not always as it appears, as many of us know. And then we're a little bit over time, and I definitely want to make sure everyone has their 10 minutes for Q&A. So is there anything you'd like to add in terms of accounting, Julie? Just a quick.
I will just reinforce, separate your finances. That is probably the first right step and the easiest one you can do, which is to go into the bank, or you can even do it online now, open a new checking account, right? And start really separate out your finances. And then when it gets to tax time, or if it gets too overwhelming to take care of your own books, ask somebody who does this all day long. That's called staying in your lane.
Okay, thank you. No, it's true. It's good advice.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so thank you,
And I think
Rose.
did Tanya have her hand up, Karen, or is that?
We're almost there. We're almost to Q&A.
Okay.
But before we get into Q&A, I would love to present both of you with a certificate of appreciation from not only Vidovy and our team, but I I know that we're very appreciative of you sharing your time and your expertise with us, which I'm sure as the audience feels the same. Again, thank you for sharing it with the aesthetic industry. For many of us, it's not just a hobby trade. This really is our lives and our careers. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. So we're
Thank
gonna
you,
go,
Karen.
yeah, you're very welcome. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna open it up to Q&A. So if anybody in the audience has a question, you can either turn on your camera and just speak up and ask. You can direct to either Rose, Julie, or myself. Or if you'd like, if you click on participants, there is a little green button, or it should say yes, and it's like a little green check mark. Or if you not, you can type it in the chat and I will read any questions that you guys have in the chat.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I'm with a client and she's a friend of mine, so she's listening too. A quick question about budgeting. What app would you recommend to use, or if there's a software, or what format? Right now, I currently use the $0 budgeting process. It's a little different for business. I use that for personal. It's a little different for business because of the variables in there, but how would you recommend the best and most efficient way to budgeting?
You know, I mentioned this in one of my slides, but honestly, I used Mint for a really long time. And I just recently went to QuickBooks, and QuickBooks I actually have to pay for. So because I'm an accounting person, I don't like to pay for things. You know, I'm very careful with my money. Yeah, to my kids' demise. But anyway, so honestly, Cece, I would recommend Mint because it does all of the budgeting. You can budget for it. It sends me reminders if I'm over budget. I can set limits. If a check goes through that's over my tolerable limit, it tells me. When a deposit comes in automatically, I get a little ding ding, and it's also an app on my phone. I think it's really, really good. And it will help you with your budget, I believe. I didn't get too much into the budgeting because I have other ways of budgeting, but I believe it will budget for you too. And I took a class, believe it or not, from someone that Tanya referred me to that does a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's what he turned me on to. So that's why I'm turning you on to it.
I used it as well. It's very user-friendly. It's very user-friendly and it's not super complicated. So I've used it before and it's really
But thank you, Cece, for saying the word budget. That just warms my heart.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty. I see there is a couple of questions in the chat. So I'm going to read one in the chat, and then if somebody else wants to speak up after, we can. Somebody says, when to Bree would like to ask, it's a little bit off topic, but when to decide to go from an LLC to an S Corp? Rose, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So, so remember, an S Corp is a tax designation. So you're always going to stay an LLC. It's just how you're going to be taxed. The biggest benefit from choosing S Corp designation from being an LLC is the self-employment tax essentially goes away, basically, because you're paying it's limited. I should say limited to the amount of salary you pay yourself. So as an S Corp, you have to pay yourself a salary. And then based on that salary, then you pay your Medicare and Social Security. And then any distributions outside of that in your LLC no longer pays those taxes. So that's one of the biggest benefits from being an S Corp. And so anytime you're ready to do that, you could certainly make that election and talk to your CPA or your tax accountant, and they'll help you with that.
Great. Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to turn on their camera and ask a question? If not, I do see a couple more in the chat, but I want to give someone an opportunity who wants to turn on their camera. Okay. Alrighty. I see there's another one from Eden. And she says, I filed and was granted my LLC in Pennsylvania, but I'm thinking about moving to Georgia. I haven't done any business in Pennsylvania yet. Do I dissolve my LLC here, or should I transfer it to Atlanta? Or can I transfer, excuse me?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, Rose,
Yes.
you take
Okay.
that
Rose.
You haven't done business in Pennsylvania yet. So first of all, I can't give legal advice, but I can give a kind of a generalization on what I've seen people do when they move and they want to do business in a different state. Each state has their own rules when it comes to registration filing for business entities. And if you plan on doing business in that state, I would essentially either dissolve your existing Pennsylvania entity and then just start over in, was it Georgia?
Yes.
And I think that's probably the cleanest way to do it. You can also keep your Pennsylvania LLC and then file as a, a foreign entity. And I'd have to look at, I'm not familiar with Georgia's laws because I'm a California lawyer, but I'm pretty sure they may have a process for which you can do business in Georgia by registering your LLC in their jurisdiction as a foreign, like a foreign entity to do business in their state. But then you'll have to pay taxes to that state too. So it probably doesn't make sense to have an LLC in 2 states if you're doing business in 1.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Alrighty, so we're almost out of time. I know, Bree, you have a quick thing if you want to go ahead. And also for Julie, quick, one of your spreadsheets that was in your breakdown, one of our audience was hoping that they could get a copy or maybe even like a screenshot of that spreadsheet.
Oh, definitely. I can do it either way. I can share my screen again. And you want me to do that? Yeah, here we go. I'll share my screen. And
Okay.
take
Jessica, if you either want to take a screenshot or was it this one?
Wait, hold on. Wait, let me do a new share. It went to a second screen. I think that one will be better. Is that the spreadsheet you were talking about? Yeah, and learn to love Excel. If I didn't tell you that yet, learn to love Excel. Okay, here I am talking to, estheticians, and I'm talking about accounting. What was the first thing I did when I started to prepare for this? I opened up a spreadsheet.
Right.
So
perfect. I think that was the correct one. So hopefully she got a screenshot of that. And then one more minute, Bree, I know you had your hand raised, and then after that, we're gonna go ahead and move on.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm going to leave my camera off. I'm still at work, but quick question in terms of accounting, Julie, please. Do my taxes, do the forms look different if I'm an LLC compared to if I'm a sole proprietor? Would my tax forms actually look different?
they're going to file different tax forms. So you'll do a Schedule C if you're a sole proprietor, and you'll do a different one. I can't remember right off the top of my head what you're going to do for an LLC. So those will be different. So the 1040 or the 1040A or the EZ or whatever you file as a person, right? That's your personal stuff. But then if you're an LLC, it will be different paperwork, and then you'll distribute profit to yourself, and that will flow in. And then Rose kind of touched on some of the different, we've got Medicare and Medicaid and
Okay.
self-employed. It gets really
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I appreciate your time and knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All righty, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up our outro. So thank you all as we end up closing Vidovy's first ever Social Education Aesthetic Summit. I would like to thank again our amazing panelists and also our amazing audience for attending. For those of you who signed up on Eventbrite, we're actually going to be emailing all of you a certificate of completion with all of the panelists' signatures, as well as the date and the time, so you can keep that for your continuing education needs. If you are seeking private professional legal help, Rose Bullis, her contact information is there below. So I'll give you a quick second to take a screenshot if you guys want to take a screenshot of that. While Julie Hansen is an extremely busy college professor and entrepreneur, you can connect with her on LinkedIn under Julie M. Hansen. She's amazing. Julie, I think you almost have a marriage proposal in the
I know,
comments, I
yeah, and
believe.
that would be great because I'm available.
Ah, and lastly, here is a couple of sneak peeks for our upcoming panels. If you or an esthetician you know are interested in being a guest panelist and are willing to share your expertise in either a business or aesthetic topic, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at info@vidovy.com, or you can visit our website at www.vidovy.com. Again, these are our upcoming ones: markup versus margin, building resilience for spa professionals, and hyperpigmentation. Lastly, if you are interested and you'd like to stay connected with us, we are on Instagram and on LinkedIn as Vidovy. We're also on TikTok and Facebook as Vidovy app. But where the real magic happens is on our Facebook group, The Esthetician Entrepreneur, where you can tell us exactly what you want to see, and you can even be a guest panelist yourself. If you'd like to get in touch with me personally, my information is here. You can get in touch with me at my personal email. I do offer very limited skincare and business consulting. And last but not least, we're going to drop a link in the chat. We would love to hear your feedback on today's panel, but more importantly, what you would like to see in the future. It only takes 2 minutes, but again, we are so grateful to hear your guys' thoughts and your opinions. And once again, a final thank you for Rose and Julie. You ladies were amazing, and I love having you here. And again, very special thank you to every esthetician and audience member that joined us today. We appreciate your support. And that's about it.
That was awesome. Did you put the link in the chat? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, the link should be in the chat. The feedback form. If one of the moderators or co-hosts have that link.
There it is.
There it is. Perfect. And we would love to hear from you. And if you'd like to stick around, anybody in the audience, and just chat or network or talk to each other, you're more than welcome to stick around, and have a wonderful night.
Good to see you all.
Have a nice night. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much.